Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most eerie, universal, and frankly, absolutely fascinating cognitive glitches of the human mind. We're talking, of course, about déjà vu. Now, this is a phenomenon that has puzzled philosophers, writers, and scientists for centuries. But modern neuroscience is finally starting to unlock its secrets, and what they're finding gives us this incredible new window into how we actually process our own reality. So, picture this. I want you to recall that bizarre, almost electrical moment. You walk into a room, maybe you hear a quick snippet of conversation, or you're just looking out over a landscape, and suddenly you're hit with this overwhelming, absolute certainty. You have been here before. You know exactly how this feels. But at the exact same time, your logical brain is screaming at you that this is impossible. You know for a fact you've never been to this place. It's that wild collision of intense familiarity and undeniable impossibility that makes it just so unforgettable. Okay, let's dive into this. If you've ever felt that weird, jarring sensation, you are definitely not alone. The research shows that roughly 60 to 70% of us experience this phenomenon. So for the vast majority of you watching, your brain has successfully, or, well, perhaps unsuccessfully, pulled this exact trick on you. But who actually gets it the most? The answer might completely surprise you. Now, you'd probably assume that as you get older and, accumulate way more memories, you'd experience more of these accidental memory overlaps. But the data shows the exact opposite. Déjà vu incidence actually peaks in young adults, right between 15 and 25 years old, and then it just steadily declines with age. It's also surprisingly common among frequent travelers. And this demographic quirk sets up our central cognitive mystery. Why on earth would a younger, sharper memory system produce more false feelings of familiarity? We're going to answer that in just a bit. But first, let's look at how we even began studying this whole thing. For the longest time, déjà vu was firmly tossed into the realm of the paranormal. People attributed it to past lives or psychic premonitions. Back in 1850, Charles Dickens beautifully described the feeling in his literature. Then in 1876, a French philosopher named Émile Boinrot formally gave it a label, déjà vu, which literally translates to already seen. But the rigorous, modern scientific era, that didn't genuinely kick off until 2003, when psychologist Alan Brown cataloged decades of theories and launched a brand new era of strict laboratory investigation. Section 1, Inside Your Memory Machine. Let's look at the neurological suspects. To really get this, we have to look at the dual process model of recognition memory. Basically, when you recognize something, your brain is actually using two completely distinct systems. First, you have recollection. This is driven by your hippocampus. It's slow, it's detailed, and it gives you the full episodic context. It's how you know, oh, I met Sarah at a conference in Berlin last March. But then you have familiarity. This operates in the rhinal cortex, deep down in the temporal lobe. It is incredibly fast, totally context-free, and it just gives you that pure gut feeling of, I know this. Normally, these two systems work in perfect harmony, but in déjà vu, they decouple. So here is the exact step-by-step misfire sequence in your brain that creates that physical, eerie sensation. Step 1, your rhinal cortex misfires. It drops its firing rate and sends out this massive familiarity signal, basically shouting, hey, we know this. Step 2, your hippocampus frantically scrambles to find the rich, detailed memory to back that up and fails because, well, the memory simply doesn't exist. Step 3, your frontal lobe, which acts kind of like your brain's quality control manager, detects this bizarre conflict. And it's the friction between step 1 and step 2 that you consciously feel as déjà vu. Moving on to section 2, the leading scientific theories. Let's explain what causes that trigger. To really understand the trigger, we can look at the Gestalt familiarity hypothesis, which was developed by researcher Anne Cleary. She actually put people into virtual reality to prove that familiarity can be triggered not just by objects, but by spatial configuration. Imagine walking into a brand new hotel lobby. The furniture, the walls, the colors, they are all entirely new. But their spatial arrangement on an invisible grid is exactly identical to a hostel you stayed in, say, a decade ago. Your brain's navigational system detects that identical grid and fires a familiarity signal. But because the surface details are completely different, your hippocampus can't retrieve the original hostile memory. The result? Pure déjà vu. Now there is another major theory, and this one is based on physiology rather than spatial memory. It's called transient dysrhythmia. Think of this as a tiny, completely harmless electrical glitch. When you're in a state of high stress, extreme fatigue, or maybe cognitive overload, the electrical activity in your temporal lobe briefly loses its rhythm. It creates this little subthreshold spark in your rhinal cortex that artificially triggers a familiarity signal out of thin air. Your brain literally just had a tiny, localized electrical hiccup. Section 3. When familiarity turns dark. The clinical breakdown. This is where clinical neurology gives us a very sobering, clear window into the brain. In temporal lobe epilepsy, which is actually where neurosurgeon Wilder Penfield first studied this back in the mid-20th century, déjà vu can act as an aura. It becomes an intense warning sign right before a seizure. We also see persistent déjà vu in older adults suffering from transient epileptic amnesia. And crucially, we see it triggered by powerful pharmacological agents. Things like high-potency cannabis, psychedelics, and dopamine-replenishing drugs like L-Dopa can basically flood the temporal lobe, forcefully and artificially triggering that familiarity network over and over again. And when this delicate circuitry completely breaks down, it leads to a truly tragic clinical condition. With normal déjà vu, your brain has a false feeling, sure, but your frontal lobe steps in and tells you it's false. But then we have déjà vécu, which translates to already lived. Seen quite often in dementia patients, this happens when the frontal lobe's metacognitive ability to fact-check completely dies. The patient doesn't just feel the moment is familiar. They have the pathological conviction that they have actually genuinely lived it before. They might completely refuse to read the newspaper because they honestly believe they've already read today's news. The brain safety net has just completely failed. This tragedy led cognitive neuropsychologist Dr. Chris Mullen to a really profound realization. He says, the sensations associated with remembering are separate to the contents of memory. I want you to take a moment and just really let that sink in. The pure feeling of remembering something is neurologically completely separate from the actual data of the memory. Your brain literally has a dedicated system just for generating the feeling of the past, even if there is absolutely no past to pull from. Which brings us to Section 4, the ultimate cognitive twist. What déjà vu actually means for you. Akira O'Connor's 2018 fMRI study revealed something absolutely incredible. Researchers used hypnosis to induce a déjà vu-like state in participants while actively scanning their brains. Now, everyone expected the memory centers down in the temporal lobe to be lighting up like a fireworks display, right? But they didn't. They stayed surprisingly quiet. Instead, it was the frontal lobes, the decision-making centers, that lit up with intense activity. They were the ones doing all the heavy lifting. And this beautifully brings us to the whole concept of metacognition. This is basically your brain's ability to think about its own thinking. Because of that fMRI study, scientists now believe that déjà vu is not a failure of your brain at all. It is actually proof of a profoundly healthy, active mind. Déjà vu is the exact moment your frontal lobe successfully catches a lie that your temporal lobe just tried to tell you. It's your brain fact-checking itself in real time. And you know what? This perfectly explains why it peaks in young adults, because their frontal monitoring systems are at their absolute peak sharpness. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this one provocative thought. If your brain didn't catch that error, what else would you believe? Déjà vu is ultimate proof that memory isn't just some passive video recording of your life. It is an active, constructed reality built by brain regions constantly communicating and sometimes flat out arguing with one another. So the next time you feel that eerie electrical sense of familiarity, don't be spooked by it. Just take a second to thank your frontal lobes for catching the glitch. Thanks so much for watching, and keep exploring the incredible machinery inside your head.